If you grew up with a game console back in the early 2000s, there was a damn high chance you had a PlayStation 2. The PS2 was a jack of all trades and had great titles from every genre, but us kids on the playground were all about 3D platformers, and the game of choice for my group of friends was always Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, or as it's known in PAL territories, Sly Raccoon... Wait, what? Was released in 2002 for the PlayStation 2. The player takes control of the titular character Sly Cooper in his quest to steal back his family's sacred thieving book,
the Thievius Raccoonus.
What immediately drew me into the Sly games and what I still love so much about the series is its art direction. The game itself has such a well-designed, cel-shaded look to it that, thanks to its art style, still looks good today, something that cannot be said about all early PlayStation 2 games. The cel-shaded characters fit perfectly with the animated cutscenes. I loved watching these as a kid. Before and after each mission, the player gets to watch these incredible animated cutscenes that give off both a film noir and Saturday morning cartoon vibe at the same time. When compared to other cutscenes from games at the time, these were in a league of their own. Most games back in the day would use pre-rendered 3D cutscenes or solely rely on in-engine stuff, but Sly Cooper instead harkens back to the early days of CD gaming to use animated cutscenes to flesh out the story, and it's better because of it. Sly Cooper has one of the best balances of style and gameplay I've ever seen in a video game. The visuals of a game usually come second to the gameplay for me, but in the case of Sly Cooper, the style is so heavily integrated into the gameplay that they become one and the same. While some games certainly go for style over substance, Sly Cooper is one of the more rare instances of style with substance. The presentation and animation of characters feels seamlessly woven into the gameplay. Sly is a master thief and has a large variety of moves at his disposal, each one easy to perform with an animation that not only makes performing the move satisfying, but also gives the player visual feedback to show their input was read correctly. These super sneaky master thief moves are all done by walking up to an object and pressing the circle button. Players are clued in that they can perform one of these moves either by a blue aura or a familiar object such as a hook or rail that Sly can jump onto. These are everywhere throughout the game and are an integral part of getting through each stage. The player needs to learn how to identify objects they can cling to, and when in doubt,
just jump and hit the circle button.
Sly's adventure takes him across the world, hunting down all members of the notorious criminal gang known as the Fiendish Five. Each world has a unique setting with its own enemies, music, and stage gimmicks. The designers did a fantastic job at making each world feel real. At the start of every new world, the player is thrown into the first level. The end of the first level always leads to the main hub and makes the world feel like everything is really connected. In the main hub, the player has to do a little bit of platforming, puzzle solving, and sneaking in order to get to each level. Within each level is a key that Sly needs to unlock a generator, or an elevator, or some fireworks. Each world is split into two different parts with two barriers that Sly needs to unlock. The first one is usually unlocked with 3 keys, and the last barrier with 7. The first part of the main hub usually has 3 or 4 levels, and the second half has the remaining. This gives the player a little bit of choice in what order they want to tackle each stage. Throughout all the platforming stages, there are clues hidden around for the player to collect. If you manage to find all the clues in a level, you can unlock a safe somewhere in that same level that will either hold the blueprints of the world you're in or a page from the Thievius Raccoonus. These pages teach Sly a new
super sneaky master thief move
and can be performed by hitting the triangle button. This makes collecting the clues something that the player actually wants to do. It's fun to get new power-ups and find out what Sly's going to learn next. In addition to the clues, there are also coins hidden around each level and in the main hub. If the player collects 100 of these, they will get a lucky charm, which gives Sly 1 extra hit. If the player collects another 100, then they get a gold lucky charm, which gives them 2 extra hits. And finally, if they collect another 100, they get an extra life. If the player runs out of lives while playing a level, they will have to continue and restart that level from the beginning. Aside from that though, there really isn't any punishment for getting a game over. Levels can be tricky though, and since Sly only has one hit by default, even the most skilled players are likely to see the game over screen at least once on their quest. That is the general gist of Sly Cooper, and with that all said and done, now we can get into the nitty-gritty. The best way to describe Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus is as a stealth-light 3D platformer. What I mean is, Sly Cooper is a traditional 3D platformer with some stealth elements thrown in. While Sly Cooper rarely goes full stealth mode, the core mechanics of the game do a great job at making the player feel sneaky. Everything about Sly's character is done to give the player the feeling of being a cunning, stealthy thief, right down to how the voice actor delivers his lines in a hushed tone of voice.
I've got to find my way up there and fast before that lunatic squashes another town.
Moving Sly around each level is a blast since he controls so well and has animations that make all of his moves feel both snappy and stealthy. From the way he lightly touches down after a jump or quickly puts his cane in his mouth as he climbs a pipe, the player doesn't just feel like they are controlling a master thief, but rather that they are a master thief. The developers did a fantastic job at keeping the stealth motif throughout the entire game. While most enemies you encounter don't typically have a way around them without direct confrontation, the levels filled with laser puzzles, objects to hide behind, and buildings to shimmy across keep the player feeling like they're sneaking around a villain's lair when, in reality, they're just playing a cleverly designed 3D platformer. The level design lends itself to giving us some unique camera angles that further add to the feeling of sneaking through a heavily guarded fortress. The soundtrack for the game complements the stealth-light mechanics as well, since anytime Sly hides behind something or shimmies across a ledge, the music fades out and all we hear are the sounds of his footsteps as he inches along. Though the music in the game isn't quite catchy enough to listen to on its own, it definitely fits each stage that it's in and adds to the atmosphere, but I'd be lying if there weren't a couple songs that I found myself humming as I went about my day. Sly Cooper focuses on being a 3D platformer first and a stealth game second, and that's what makes it such an easy game for anyone to pick up and play. You don't need to play it patiently, but you may find that taking your time and trying to go undetected may help you succeed. The first thing that we see when we boot up Sly Cooper is Sly himself. It isn't a pre-rendered, fantastic, over-the-top cutscene to make the game seem like this incredibly high-octane experience. Instead, the intro is an incredibly cinematic, in-engine cutscene depicting exactly what the player is going to be doing in-game. This was a brilliant decision. Everything that Sly does in this opening is both eye-catching and something the player can do as soon as they start the game. It doesn't tease you with things you'll eventually be able to do. Sly starts off as a master thief and only gets better as the game goes on, both through moves that the player learns along the way and the skill that the player gets while learning how to control Sly. When you start a new game, we're introduced to the first side character of our story, Bentley.
Sly! Come in! Sly! Do you read me?
Yeah, I read you. Loud and very loud.
This simple opening interaction immediately sets up the tone for the rest of the game. Bentley is our loud and goofy information spout, and Sly is as cool and clever as he seemed from the opening cinematic. Although it does rely on just straight up telling the player what to do.
To landeth safely upon diminutive points, leapeth lively and presseth the triggering device with the round geometrical object emblazoned upon it.
So jump and hit the circle button to land on narrow spots.
That's a rough translation.
The delivery of the voice lines and banter between characters makes the tutorials feel more like cutscenes rather than the game just telling you what to do. In fact, the whole setup for this makes so much sense. I never once thought it was weird or out of place for Bentley to be radioing in and telling me what to do, since he really did feel like my eyes and ears. The world and relationships that this game is able to create really work to mask the tutorial aspect of early levels and make it feel more like something the gang has done 1,000 times before. The rest of the characters we meet throughout the game are all amazing. Every single character is memorable and has a terrific voice actor to play them, my favorite being Inspector Carmelita Fox. Aw man, she's so hot. No, seriously, she's like canonically hot, it's hilarious. The banter between Sly and Carmelita is incredible. Sly is suave and flirtatious, and Carmelita isn't having any of it. Everything Sly says to her hardly registers, and she only cares about capturing Sly and bringing him to justice. I love that the first thing she does is shout, "Criminal!" and leap off of a building. She's so badass! The levels with Carmelita were always some of my favorites as a kid. The change of pace from a slow burn stealth-like game to a frantic escape was always really exciting.
You can't escape me, raccoon!
Aside from Carmelita, the other main character that we have is Murray, the Getaway van driver. He doesn't have quite as big a role as Bentley does, but there are several levels where we either get to race as him in the van or protect him in a shooting escort mission. While I like Murray's character design and voice actor, I'm not a huge fan of his levels. The driving ones are fine, but the shooting ones really aren't very fun. These levels are a nice distraction from the game, but the star of the show really is the 3D platforming segments. While never outright horrible, the non-3D platforming levels tend to be either boring or frustrating, or both. In addition to the levels with Murray, there are some where Sly has to ride on a gunboat, or even one where you just have to kill chickens. I find these to get in the way of the actual game, and due to the reliance on so many of these levels later in the game, they make Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus suffer a bit from what I like to call Sonic the Hedgehog syndrome. Allow me to explain. In the original Sonic the Hedgehog for Sega Genesis, the developers spent most of the time designing Green Hill Zone to be as fast and fun as possible, since it was not only the first stage new players would play, but would also be the stage that people would end up having to play the most if they wanted to get good and practice to beat the game. However, because of this, later levels in Sonic the Hedgehog just don't play as well as Green Hill. They're slow and boring, the color palettes aren't as interesting, and they have these weird gimmicks that aren't fun, like running slowly underwater. In a similar way, Sly Cooper feels like the most development time was spent on the first few stages, and less on the latter ones. I mean, just take a look at the levels in each world. 6 out of 7 levels in Tide of Terror are platformers. Then, in Sunset Snake Eyes, there are only 5 platformers. Vicious Voodoo has 4. Fire in the Sky also only has 4. And the final world, well, just hold on a minute, the final world is gonna get its own section. It's really unfortunate too, because after beating the final boss of each world, you unlock a new move that's mapped to the circle button. While these new moves are incorporated well into future levels, I can't help but feel that there just aren't enough platforming levels to really feel like they're being used to their full potential. With that in mind though, the 3D platforming levels that do exist are absolutely fantastic, every single one of them. I think the levels in Vicious Voodoo are probably the least enjoyable, mostly because they all sort of look the same, but they're still really fun to navigate. The creators often put the end of the level right within eyesight at the beginning and make the player go all around and out of the way just to get somewhere they could see from the beginning, but was just out of reach. This really helps to make each level feel like a real place that Sly is figuring out how to get through. There also aren't any floating platforms, just for the sake of platforming. Everything that Sly interacts with makes sense from a physics standpoint. Well, cartoon physics anyway. I always had a particular fondness for the hooks. The sound effect that happens when Sly grabs onto a hook and the way the physics engine handles swinging is just so satisfying. I also love that you can make Sly's head spin around through his neck if you time your jump correctly. The level designers do an excellent job of building up the difficulty. One of the best examples is with the roulette wheels from the level Boneyard Casino. When you first encounter them, they're just a spinning obstacle to hop over, but each time you see them afterwards, more and more lasers are added, making them progressively more difficult the further you get into the level. Sly Cooper is filled with this clever type of level design, slowly introducing the player to a new mechanic and then throwing them a more difficult challenge. I mentioned the clues before at the beginning of the video. If you collect enough, you can unlock new moves for Sly. While they can be pretty useful, they are by no means required for beating the game. Some, however, are more useful than others. I found the dive to be the most useful, especially when I wanted to take out an enemy from above, but I can't deny that I used to love the slow motion move. I used to find the coolest places to use slow motion when I was a kid, my favorite always being in 2 to Tango when Carmelita is shooting you down from the hanging letters. Collecting and finding the clues really isn't all that difficult. There were a couple throughout the game that tripped me up for a few minutes, but as long as you're looking, you can find them all on your first run of most levels. However, I found the blueprint safes to be the most annoying. They don't give you a move, but instead will tell you the location of clues when you're using your binocucom. While this was helpful sometimes, I found it to be frustrating since I never knew when I was going to find it. It was the 3rd safe I unlocked in Vicious Voodoo, and since there are only 4 platforming stages in that world, it was practically useless. In my opinion, the blueprint safe should have been put on the first stage, since the player always plays the intro stage first, while the others can be played in almost any order. Aside from that though, finding clues was fun and I felt motivated to do so since the reward was so frequent and exciting. As soon as you collect the clues for one level, you get a small upgrade. It was addicting. I couldn't go on to another stage without finding all the clues first. When I was a kid, I mostly ignored them until I beat the game, but I remember having fun going back to find them all, so no matter how you play, they're always fun to collect. Then there are the Master Thief sprints, which essentially make you speedrun each level. Let me tell you, some of these are really tricky, but the reward for beating one is getting developer commentary for that level. Now, as a kid, I didn't care too much for this, but as an adult, this was such a cool treat and was great motivation for 100%ing the game. Once you've collected all the keys, Sly has to face one of the members of the Fiendish Five in a one-on-one duel. Each battle is completely different from the last, and as a kid, I really appreciated that you could go back and refight each of the bosses since they were so much fun. I remember finding them to be really challenging, but playing it now, they weren't all that bad. It could be because somewhere buried deep in my brain I had all of the patterns memorized, but I think I may just be a better gamer now, although Mugshot gave me a run for my money. But Panda King is stupid easy. In fact, most of Fire in the Sky was really easy. Specifically, there is a shooting level and a driving level, just like in Sunset Snake Eyes, and I found the earlier ones in those levels to be more challenging than the ones from Fire in the Sky.
Man, those crummy dogs are bumping me right and left!
Apparently, these 2 worlds were switched around at some point in development, but I guess the difficulty wasn't adjusted for. If you've ever played this game, you'll know just how many small details the developers added to make the experience that much better for the player. The first thing you'll notice is the idle animations. All of the enemies have idle animations that you get to see from a safe distance. These almost always have them interacting with their form of attack in some way, giving a careful player the opportunity to study them and figure out how to best approach. Sly and Carmelita also have their own special animations. In particular, I love the detail they put into making the movements of their tails look so realistic. Sly just has so much personality built into his animations, from being able to see his breath in the snow-topped mountains of China to his multitude of death animations. I loved seeing these as a kid, and to this day I can say that it was entertaining to see the different ways that our protagonist would be killed, my favorite always being the drowning one. These fun death animations also keep the player from getting too frustrated, and checkpoints are always nearby, so you're never losing too much progress. Even if you game over, each level really isn't that long to begin with. They really went the extra mile to make the player feel like they were Sly. While it's fun to insert yourself into a game and make choices, I find that sometimes it can be more fun to control a character who has, well, character.
You need to return the Firestone of India to its rightful owners.
And I was gonna give it to you as a little token of my... Hey, you know, that bazooka really brings out the color of your eyes. Very fetching.
I mentioned before, but I'll say it again, the voice acting in this game is magnificent, and the entire game is voice acted. Every one of the bosses has amazing voice work and are genuinely entertaining to listen to.
Wow, you're a Cooper? You know, that Thingus Rackamagookus had a lot of nice pictures, but way too many big words.
Every scene sounds like it's been recorded for something that could have aired on television. No one ever acts out of character. Murray is goofy and tries his best, but usually gets into trouble.
Come on, Sly, they're a pack of monkeys. How can I lose?
Bentley is always looking for a solution and prefers to sit back and help Sly from behind the scenes.
I had to overcome some personal demons to get the answer to this one. Try 4, 4, 4.
And Sly is a suave, cunning master thief.
My gang and I loafed around England for a while, enjoying the pleasant weather, and then headed back home, excited for our next heist.
Even just having the main collectible being keys makes total thematic sense. Sly is a thief trying to get behind locked doors. I mean, what better item to use to unlock something with than a key? And the coins! Every single world has a different design for the coins that reflect where you are in some way or another. There's so many cute little touches added that really give the game a great sense of charm, just not found in a lot of games these days, or even really back in the heyday of the PS2. But by far my favorite special touch is the manual of the game. It's the Thievius Raccoonus! How cute is that? Rather than just having the cover be the Thievius Raccoonus with a normal game manual on the inside, all of the information is written as if Sly and Bentley are talking to each other. It's such a nice touch that goes above and beyond. Plus, not only is the manual full color on the inside, but they even used some of the pages just to show off artwork from the Thievius Raccoonus. Nowadays, we're lucky to even get an instruction booklet, let alone one with extra pages in it dedicated to just artwork. The level of detail in Sly Cooper goes above and beyond other games and truly shows you how much the developers really cared about the game they were making. However, I need to discuss the final world. As I said before, I think that the best levels in Sly Cooper are the first ones. Vicious Voodoo is really samey and bogged down with non-platforming stages, and while Fire in the Sky has some great platforming levels, it too suffers from having too many levels focused elsewhere. But I was always especially disappointed by the final world, even as a kid. The Panda King's portion of the Thievius Raccoonus has notes on technology, meaning that rather than incorporating a fun new platforming element to the final world, instead it's mostly on-rails shooting and van driving. I always hated this as a kid, and playing them again now, I feel kind of the same way. They aren't bad, but they have little replay value. The levels aren't fun to run around in, and the one that is really short. In fact, the entire world is really small. It's probably the length of 2, maybe 3 levels from previous worlds in total. A bit of a disappointment if you ask me. It takes place in a volcano fortress! Can you imagine the cool platforming that could have been done here? Instead, the player has to just sit back and click on birds. Then there's the final boss with Clockwork. In an attempt to up the scale and make the final battle seem more epic, Sly fights Clockwork flying around on Carmelita's jetpack. Carmelita will shoot Clockwork every once in a while, and when she hits him, that's your cue to shoot him. It's a good challenge, but it feels a bit out of place to me. I'm all for having a spectacular final boss, but I'd rather have one that tests me on everything I've learned up until this point, not a one-off gimmick saved for the final level. After you get through his first 2 phases is where the real challenge finally begins. There aren't any enemies, just tricky, well-timed platforming. This section puts up a good fight, and if you lose it, you have to start the battle with Clockwork over again. Honestly, I don't mind this. The final boss should have to be beaten in one go, and each phase isn't very long anyhow. Once you make it to the face, it's over for Clockwork and retreated to the ending cinematic, which of course is incredible. Really, the final level isn't bad. I just feel like it doesn't fit with what the game is trying to sell itself as. A 3D platformer with stealth elements. I also don't really understand Clockwork either. First of all, he's giant. How did he even fit into Sly's house? And apparently he's immortal. The twist comes right at the end and feels an awful lot like a twist just for the sake of having a twist. There isn't any build up to it really. The player is of course wondering who the final member of the Fiendish Five will be, but there isn't any reason to think he isn't just another criminal. Like, it's cool that if you paid close attention throughout each of the story sequences, you could see Clockwork in the background of each picture in the Thievius Raccoonus, but there doesn't really seem to be a reason for it. You could just as easily take this element out of the picture, and it wouldn't change the story whatsoever. It's unfortunate that a game as great as Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus has a weak finish. It's not a terrible final world by any means, though. Each level plays well, and I just wish that it was more focused on the platforming, since that's what we've been practicing for the entire game. A final level should test the player on their skills that they've acquired throughout the entire game, not some random new gimmicks thrown in at the end. But don't let that dissuade you from playing Sly Cooper. It's available on PS2 and in the Sly Collection on PS3 and PS Vita, all of which are dirt cheap these days. While Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus was one of my favorite games as a kid, I never ended up playing the other two games on PS2. Occasionally at a friend's house, sure, but I never owned them myself. And now that I'm all grown up, it's time to finally finish this series and see what I've been missing out on all these years. I'm Bofner, and thanks for watching. See ya! So if you use the dive move and mash triangle as you enter the level A Temporary Truce, you're free to explore as Sly. You're welcome!